There we go.
Welcome today. We appreciate you joining us for a digital conversation on innovative assessment practices that support student success. The webinar recording today is brought to you by the ACPA Commission on Assessment and Evaluation and also the Grand Challenges in Assessment Group. What we will do today is we're talking across academic and student affairs at 4 campuses and talking about innovation and different practices we've used to support student success. And so the organization today will be a presentation on a recent innovation we've taken, and then followed by a discussion around how we approach those processes. As each presenter starts and shares their innovation, they will introduce themselves and then describe more what they have done on their local campus. So without further ado.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Blankenship, Director of Learning Outcomes Assessment at Salt Lake Community College. And today I'm going to be talking about an innovation that is more about structure rather than technology and bringing that work of assessment into faculty spaces more directly and structurally rather than as a result of partnerships across the college. So, has been said about engaging faculty in assessment work. It is a constant pain point if you ever go to any of the Assessment Institute conferences or anything along those lines. So, got a selection here of strategies for increasing faculty involvement and what that looks like in a variety of different disciplines at the institution as well as the program level. But what I'm going to be talking about today is a change that Salt Lake Community College made pretty recently in response to a recommendation from our accreditor, the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. So this change is something that may look a little bit different than what you've seen at other spaces. So originally, learning outcomes assessment lived alongside our in institutional effectiveness organizationally. And following this recommendation, it was a pretty radical shift to move this back into academic affairs where it had been organizationally many, many years ago. But what this did was change the reporting structure from a person who reported directly to a VP of institutional effectiveness that was alongside of, say, data science and analytics and strategic analysis and accreditation to reporting alongside of more teaching-focused offices, such as the Faculty Teaching and Learning Center, Gen Ed, High Impact Practices offices, and our OER initiatives as well. We also changed the position to the one I have right now. So our previous position was someone who worked kind of by themselves for the most part and was a dedicated psychometrician, had an ed testing background, no teaching experience at all. And we still wanted some experience with assessment. So like my background is specifically in writing assessment. That's where my scholarship has been published for a large degree, but I don't have that psychometric background. But we also added teaching experience as a requirement for the person leading out on assessment. And I will say this is a bit different than some places where, say, a faculty member gets reassigned time from their teaching load to lead assessment at their institution. This is a dedicated administrative role. I hold the title of director. I don't maintain a tenured faculty position. So it is certainly still an administrative role, but it is one that asks for more faculty experience rather than ed testing experience. And finally, as a part of this big move, we reduced some of the restrictions around individual program assessment methods, the processes, the instruments that are allowed to be used. Previously, the institutional effectiveness kind of model that we used very much relied on the AAC and U value rubrics and used them basically verbatim from the existing ones that are on the website and any changes to those were either not allowed or the data was set aside and not aggregated with other programs because the instruments were not exactly the same. And so that introduced a lot of pain points with faculty because they said, hey, this doesn't have any meaning to us. These rubrics are not something we've designed. They don't speak the language that we speak in our discipline. So, one of the first things that I did in this position, and this was something that was supported by the provost's office as well, is remove these restrictions and requirements, largely speaking, to allow faculty to apply their own disciplinary methodologies. And and this has been a big shift, as you might imagine, and it's part of the reason why we removed the ed testing background from the director position. In addition to this, we placed faculty governance bodies, particularly Faculty Senate and our individual school curriculum committees, so like the School of Business, the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, their curricular bodies, as the primary approver of learning outcomes, both the language and like the number and how they relate to larger like institutional learning outcomes, as well as assessment plans. Those did not get approved through my office anymore. They are approved through the faculty curricular bodies. So I am able to provide feedback, but I am simply a place of feedback rather than an approver. So really moving some of the authority of the office back into faculty spaces as well. So what did this end up accomplishing? Well, I will say that one of the biggest things, and probably the reason that I chose this as the innovation that I wanted to bring out, because this is not particularly innovative. There are plenty of schools that do this across the country, but in my experience, I've seen more and more learning outcomes assessment being moved out of faculty spaces and into compliance spaces, and that's why I wanted to point this out because there's so much faculty engagement with assessment these days compared to when I was a faculty member at the institution, and it was purely a checkbox compliance driven thing. So we see assessment being taken up by faculty governance committees really regularly, both at the program level and the school level, as well as at the institution level. So previously, this was, again, a very kind of rubber stamp thing. And now I see these committees engaging with the language of learning outcomes, with the language of the design of instruments to measure student learning. And this dovetails really well with our faculty teaching and learning centers focus on inclusive pedagogies, talking about the instruments of evaluating learning. Uh, Also, widespread revision of program learning outcomes language and curriculum mapping. Just to give you an example, the most programs didn't have a curriculum map, and I ran across programs, so an associate's level program with 30 discrete learning outcomes for the program, that none of which got measured in any meaningful way. So as a part of moving this back into faculty spaces, we are seeing much revision of that. We're seeing engagement with the process of it. And now almost every program on campus, aside from those that are either brand new or have seen significant revisions, more in that in a moment, have very clear, measurable learning outcomes and a curriculum map to support it. To that point, now they have to have an assessment plan. They didn't used to have that because it was all handled through the central office rather than as a program. So now they have to have an assessment plan on their program curriculum outlines. And while I supported this, this was not something that I mandated. This was something that Senate took up. And Faculty Senate voted unanimously, in fact, to approve this addition to program curriculum outlines. So again, part of the taking up of this. Lots of increased faculty participation in assessment-related professional development. So I've had, at this point, hundreds of faculty go through assessment workshops, assessment presentations. We just recently, a couple of weeks ago, had a college-wide assessment day where even though I ordered more food than I needed, more people showed up without enrolling, and the table was cleaned. Had people staying after time to continue their discussions about assessment. So it's been really heartening to see this. And I attribute that this is largely because of this kind of cultural change. We talk about a culture of compliance, and a big phrase in the literature is the culture of assessment, right? And I really try to push that to the side as well and call it a culture of curiosity. What does it mean to wonder about how our students learn and what would work best for them to accomplish the goals that we have for our programs, rather than how do we comply with our accreditor? I think it's Peter Ewell who said that if you do good assessment for pedagogical reasons, that the compliance piece will come along the way. And that's absolutely something I've been seeing as an outcome to this structural change. A few challenges do remain, though. We have statewide legislative and systems initiatives that continue to change. Uh, my office is still quite small. It is bigger than it used to be when it was in institutional effectiveness. We have some additional funding for part-time positions, but even with the addition of a faculty associate director who does get a little reassigned time, there's still a lot of work to do that my office just doesn't have the capacity for. So figuring out ways to be efficient with the capacity we do have. And faculty agency in these processes requires not only the authority to make decisions, but also the knowledge to make informed decisions. So these are some of the challenges I still face, and maybe we'll get into some of those in the roundtable discussion. But that's what I've got for us today.
I'm George Still. I'm the Associate Vice President of Institutional Effectiveness at Fresno State. And so we're going to make a transition from, I think, qualitative, more learning outcome based assessment to actually big data, and kind of framing a conversation around big data. So I've been here 2 years, but done institutional effectiveness accreditation, outcomes assessment, survey research for 20 years. So this definitely is a kind of culmination of where we're at, and I think where I see us heading as it relates to the big data science and how we inform organizational pieces. And so a couple background. So I gave three citations here that are recent articles as it relates to predictive analytics, which is the space that I'm talking about today, and how we use big data to help uh, inform student success practices on campus. The campus intervention that we did, and kind of by way of background and talking about predictive analytics, is I was reluctant to get into this space, in part because I do think that often this data gets used as a deterministic space, and so really it's focusing on that students don't have a likelihood of persisting, and this is kind of building out of quant crit space, which is the kind of where I've entered in this work and how I'm trying to push it forward. Where how do we understand the organizational behaviors that actually pose as much, if not more, of a risk to students? How do we actually understand in population variances? Because one of the big challenges in predictive analytics is it often creates this deterministic space for historically marginalized population on campus. And so that's kind of the part of the work that we're doing, is trying to disrupt that, and also talk about what are the common characteristics using kind of some exploratory data analysis that often show up within groups, and exploring those and intervening there creates a better space for starting to talk about the data than using very traditional gender, race, et cetera, variables associated with that. So where we're at in this work is the immediate win is we've implemented a first year predictive model for our first time freshmen, which is one of our largest campus hemorrhage points and hemorrhage group. And so we lose 20% in the first year, and kind of focusing on that. And so then we're expanding that work with first time freshmen to 6 year graduation, and understanding the student journey at that point for them. And so we're graduating, especially for our first time freshman populations, 58% graduate. So what's happening with the other, 20% that don't finish, that we lose after year one? And then we will expand to look at, so another population is some college transfers, which typically are coming into us from community colleges without their associate's degree. So we're going to start to look at that. And last, we'll dive into issues related to associate's degree transfers, but generally we're graduating anywhere from 91 to 94% of those students within 3 years. So it isn't as high of a risk group for us. So it didn't make a sense to kind of get there until we had really explored and understand what was happening with other groups. Another interesting thing here is as we were even programming the model, and I would encourage campuses to consider this, is our student behaviors post-COVID look very different. And so coding the data or coding a model using pre-COVID data actually gave a decent amount of spurious results. And so we had to do a lot of work to do some recoding, using a couple years post-COVID to look at that. And part of me, I've already talked to my research analyst that's working on this particular project. And we want to make sure, because it wouldn't surprise me that we see another set of behavior changes as we get students in, that the COVID disruption didn't happen as much as in the middle high school part of their journey, where I think you'll probably see some 2019 behaviors return that may be impactful. And when I talk about quant crit, what we ultimately are looking at with that is we are starting to explore targeted populations explicitly without the comparison across groups. And so for us as Hispanic serving institution, the standard model is really good at predicting the likelihood of success for Hispanic students on campus, but is less impactful for other groups. And so we pulled out and actually looked where campus it serves a large Hmong population. Their needs end up being very unique. We also have a very different set of needs for our Black African American students on campus. And so part of pulling those out was starting to look at what are some commonalities, what are some ways that has then informed our work. And so what have we done with that data is that data was not then done in isolation. And so it was for a specific purpose. And so the way we pushed the data into our ecosystem is that we have a 4-tier risk profile. And part of my campus mantra is, let's stay out of the way. Let's remove administrative barriers for the students that have a low risk likelihood that the bulk of those students graduate. And so those are ones that are a 10% probability of dropping out. And so we're really working on ways that we just stay out of those students' way. And then the ones that have a 11% or higher is that we have a kind of a graduated support model for the rest of those students. And the bulk of our students are in that moderate group. And then we have a low percentage that are in the group 3 and 4 that have a high likelihood of withdrawing. And part of what we are just now in the beginning space for is I also want to understand students that, as a heavily commuter campus, students that just go to class and do nothing else, because we want to incorporate that in the risk model. And then we also want to understand, as we're pouring effort into students, who are the students that, we still invite to this table, we still engage, but we're not as focused on, and kind of the idea or mindset around that is that they have to have some degree of personal investment in their own success, and that it makes no sense for us to heavily invest time in students the 10% highest risk that, it doesn't matter what we could do, we could meet them on campus, walk them to class, and they still wouldn't do the work. So it's kind of that as a part of the approach, because we are pretty heavily staffed, constrained in the amount of staffing we have to support to staff these support services. And so part of that shift as to what we've done is there has been a creation of a inclusive support model through the Center for Student Belonging. And so we took 8 different offices that were providing different types of student support services and now consolidated those under one umbrella, and still providing targeted outreach for Black African American support to Hmong support, but it's really under kind of one umbrella and a one-stop shop, so that students aren't having to then go get this type of counseling from this office and then go to this office for this type of support. So it's now all in one space and kind of trying to give more comprehensive support. And then the other thing is our advising numbers, so our ratios are 1 to 800, which means that it is mathematically impossible to meet with all students. And so if we take out, and the low risk is about 1,300 students, and just kind of do group advising for those and do targeted outreach for individual advising for the higher risk, is that has now become a strategy for how we take that 1 to 800 and actually make it a manageable number to where they can have the one-on-one appointments with the students that need it most. And that's really where we're at with that. And the 6-year risk model will go online for fall 26. That the research fellow, which I should mention, one of the strategies we've used is we've tapped into faculty research interest. And so we actually have a faculty fellow that's working on the 6-year risk model specifically. And part of that approach too is that taking the quant crit kind of, which is now very in infancy, if you will, and expanding that. And so they're doing kind of a mixture of looking at the campus overall, but then actually really diving into our Hmong students specifically is the area of interest that he had. And they're an interesting group phenomenologically because they persist year 1 to year 2 really well, but then graduation numbers actually are some of the worst in terms of likelihood to graduate on campus. And so, understanding what's actually happening in that part of the journey and how their retention looks different than I think the campus overall is kind of our larger strategy as we think about that.
Thank you, George, and Chris for setting kind of things up where they are. My name is Dr. Laura Catherine Neal. I currently serve as the National Dean for the College of Health Sciences at DeVry University. I'm over 9 different programs with over 15,000 students within my specific part of the college. So it's a pretty large scope. And George, if you'll go to the next slide. I really want to be clear about where DeVry's story fits in the scheme of what you've heard. We're a little bit of a different lane, right? Chris has talked about where assessment responsibility should lie, and I would 100% support and agree with the premise that Chris shared in terms of what they're doing at his school. George talked about predictive analytics, involvement at the institutional level, using that as a risk assessment for students, but we're actually functioning one layer down in the component I want to share. And at the assessment structure architectural level, which is where I want to focus today. So we're looking at inside an accredited healthcare program where competency frameworks are already expected from an external perspective, and they're non-negotiable. So I've got 3 slides that I want to cover today. The first one is, what did the literature tell us that we needed to consider as far as our redesign to move from traditional assessment to competency-based assessment? What did we actually build? And then what we're seeing, including what we don't even know yet. So when we talk about the literature track itself, the core shift that we really focused on was the traditional credit hour model, which measures time, right? CBE actually measures the learning of the learner. So the accountability question changes from, did the student sit through it? Did they get through the credit hour? Did they have an academic progression through the credit hour? To, can the student actually demonstrate what they were supposed to learn from that course? And that's the definition of CBE in itself, right? It forces that conversation. And the literature has been arguing for decades now, and there's some literature here on the screen, especially from CBIN, who is probably the most predominant right now in the space, that's really been pushing that this is something that needs to be a priority and have a deeper look. From the healthcare education context, KHAM, go back 1 slide, sorry, George. KHAM and AHEMA already gave us the competency frameworks to kind of set the stage of what their expectations were in terms of a structure. However, institutions, especially large institutions that are national like my own, we really struggled in terms of how do we get all of our faculty, all of our students, all of our programming through this model and map these assessments in, not only do it in a strong and powerful way that we can show results, but also do it consistently. And so that's where our assessment validity gap kind of came into play. This is where our technical problems surfaced. Competencies are typically written at the program level. All of you have program outcomes for every one of programs that you have, or you may even have course level outcomes. But when you add in programmatic accreditation or even institutional accreditation competencies, it does change what happens at the assessment level. And that gap really does matter from a credentialing perspective. And it's where most CBE implementation kind of falls apart. So the core tension that we kind of discovered when we were in this process in the very beginning, the thick of it 2 years ago, was that the research doesn't argue against CBE. It actually argues that most institutions implement CBE without redesigning any of their assessment structure to actually match it. They try to force CBE into their structure. So with that literature, we kind of moved into, okay, what do we need to do next? You'll go to the next slide. So you're going to see a couple of different columns here on this particular screen. So we're going to talk about kind of what we did. The first thing is what programs did we bring into scope when we were looking at this particular process? We had two. One was our BSTM HIM, which is a word salad, which basically means it's a bachelor's in health information management with a focus in that particular area. And then our AHIT program, which is our associates in health IT. Those were both CAHIM accredited programs, and we had to be compliant with the new CBE standards by September of 2026. So that's like next week practically. So we started this process about 22 months ago with that go live target in place. The second part was like, where did we start, right? So that was an honest admission that we weren't sure what to do. We were like definitely fish out of water. DeVry does not have any competency-based programs, does not have any tracks. Our operations side of the house wasn't set up for this. Our academic side of the house wasn't set up for this, but we didn't have a choice because this is what our programmatic accreditor said we were doing. So our courses were already mapped to CAHIM's domains, but we needed to crosswalk. We needed to figure out how to map from domain expectations to competencies. And it's not the same as assessing. It's a different situation. And the gap here is where most institutions find the break. And we missed it at first too. I'm not going to say that it was wonderful and it was all sunshine and rainbows in the beginning. We had our own struggles. But when we went into the innovative part of it, we built a CBE mapping tool, very similar to what Chris mentioned with curriculum mapping. Where we looked at every single course level assessment and we said, where does that fit on the competency spectrum for CAHIM? Every artifact, every rubric, and the tool, when we got done building it, it flagged the gaps where competency wasn't being assessed anywhere, where we had no competency for that item anywhere in our entire program. It also flagged the redundancy, where we kept assessing the same types of competencies over and over and over again, sometimes 5 and 6 and 7, 8 times across the entire program. Overkill was an understatement in that situation. And that's where the architecture piece kind of came into play. Once you can see the picture, you can understand how it needs to fix it. But then we did the most important part, which I think really supports what Chris was saying earlier. This is where the implementation lesson came into play and where we really leveraged our faculty. We didn't hand the faculty a finished product. We basically brought them into the redesign process and said, we have a hot mess. How can we partner together to fix this? How can administration support faculty, and how can we have the faculty engage in the process? It changed our adoption behaviors and it strengthened buy-in on the entire CBE process. When we had a lot of detractors in the very beginning, when we said we were going to be a demonstration program and set the pace of everyone else in the industry. So if you take one thing away from this particular slide, I would say that buy-in in the story is what makes the scaling of this easy. We didn't just rename our existing assessments as competency-based. We didn't just slap a new lipstick on a different pig. We actually changed what we were doing. We asked, can we defend what this student is demonstrating at the competency level to the accreditor? We have to do that as part of our programmatic accreditation, but we wanted to know that very intimately across every single course, not just the handful 10 or 11 that we feel confident that our accreditor is going to ask for or might give us guidance on in the future. So we wanted that to become our standard. So when we tried to figure out what's next, we was like, okay, we know what we can do, we know where we are, but we don't know what we don't know, right? And that's the final slide I want to share with you today. So this is where we like to say at DeVry, current state and future state. So here, where are we and where are we going? So right now we've had 9 rubrics field tested in the last 12 months across 5 courses with 18 specific faculty who have not only been trained on how the competencies work and how we assess them inside these rubrics, but then how are we actually assessing the categories within that to make sure that we're actually measuring mastery where it is. That was our annual year field test cycle, and it was across both of these programs. So we handpicked courses out of both programs to get a feel for associate level responses with mastery and bachelor's level assessments. So the first thing we did was we kind of now worked with our faculty and we traced back every graded artifact back to a specific competency statement. What competency were we trying to measure? Can we confidently say it's graded consistently? Where were we at? So where were we before the redesign? Because we made some course changes, but we hadn't really looked at the assessment level until we were knocking on the door of our site visit and realized we needed to have some documentation and some proof. So after that, we kind of said, all right, what does the field test look like? So of the actual field tests we did, 81% of the students actually achieved mastery across 4 sessions for all of the complete data that we did in 24 or 26. That's great. That's our headline number, right? That's positive that we were moving forward. But the challenge we discovered is that the competencies related to financial management in one particular class, that particular mastery was running between 70 and 75%, depending upon the session, and sometimes even depending upon the faculty member. We weren't anticipating that. We assumed, falsely, that all faculty were going to leverage our rubric in the same way. And that kind of gap kind of showed us that we might have some architectural issues in terms of the way it was built on the surface, but then we also now had an area to target, a place to consider where do we go next. So where are we honestly at this point in time? What's current today, if you will? September 26th is our official go live with both programs. One was required to be ready because it was a demonstration program. That was our associate's degree. Our bachelor's, we did it anyways. We wanted to make sure we had both of them ready and we were compliant, so we weren't trying to navigate 2 different sets of expectations with our faculty. We obviously are going to have longitudinal student outcome data that is still ahead of us over the next 18 to 24 months, as not only just our college, but any of the HIM programs that are through KHIM that are accredited have to level this out. We're going to be measuring employment. We're going to be measuring credentialing. We'll look at downstream metrics to see what's been changing. And we'll be transparent across the board in terms of what our story looks like. Because we know that while we're very large, we're a large organization with a lot of students. I mean, our associate level students alone in this one program, we have over 3,000 students just in that one associate's program. So we're not just a small little community college with 40 students. We're talking thousands of students that are impacted immediately by micro changes that we make. But what I wanted to share today is I can show you the architecture that we went through. I can show you the process. I can kind of give heads up on early signals of things for you to consider. But the full outcome picture, as they say, we're still building the plane while it's in flight. And we still have a ways to go. And I'm happy to come back to any of this in the future, or definitely share any of the research and the outcomes as we continue to move through this process for anyone who's interested. I guess now I'll kick it to Beckett.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you to my wonderful colleagues here today, and thank you to everyone watching this presentation. I'm excited to talk with you all. My name is Becca Duncan. I work as a research analyst here at CU Boulder in the Division of Student Life and in the Center for Assessment, Insights, and Research. And today I'm going to be talking about our Basic Needs Center and addressing basic needs insecurity here at CU Boulder. So let's go ahead and get started by looking at the literature. The first reference that I have here is called Providing for a Community, How a Basic Needs Center Uses Assessment to House Students. What is a good literature review or talking about the literature if not throwing yourself one of your own citations? So this is a paper in a journal that we published just about a year ago about our assessment cycle and how we used assessment to really reinvigorate basic needs or basic needs insecurity here at the institution to help our students. Essentially, we know that research shows that up to half of all students are affected by basic needs insecurities, and a vast majority of those are also affected by housing insecurity. This research comes from Sarah Goldrick-Grab and the Hope Center, a pretty prominent institute when it comes to researching basic needs insecurities. Basic needs, as we see it and as we define it, typically encompasses food, housing, clothing, technology, and healthcare. And so a lot of people, when they think of basic needs insecurity, they just think of food insecurity, and that's where it stops. And so they think of pantries, they think of what students need to eat, when really we need to look at so much more. And so we need to look at housing. Are students living in safe and secure housing? What are their conditions like? Clothing, technology. We know that we have to keep up with technology. We're seeing a big insecurity and a big difference in AI usage between students. And so the students who are able to afford the top end AI models are getting a lot of extra help with their curricular assignments versus those who cannot afford some of those other AI models. And then healthcare as well. And so what sort of healthcare do students have while they're at the institution? What sort of healthcare do they have when they go home? Another basic need that I have not added here, but one thing that we're looking at our institution is child and elder care. And so we're seeing more millennials, Gen X, and Gen Z have to take care of generations above and below them. So multi-generational households, what does that mean for our students? It means they're being more constrained and they're having more pressure on them. And so when we look at that pressure and we look at the students, if we could go, yep. When we think about the stable living conditions, if we go back to the literature real quick, so we know that stable living conditions are essential for our students. This is basic foundational literature that we see from Aston and Tinto that really sets the scale for what students need. And then we know that different demographic groups are affected by basic needs and securities. So one thing we do here at the institution is we look at our demographics of our students who use our services, who take our surveys. We do demographic analyses for almost everything we do within our office. So that allows us to really dive deep and see what groups are doing well, what groups aren't, and what groups do we need to help. This last point here, college is expensive and the cost of living is very expensive, especially here in Boulder, Colorado. And so we know that that's outpacing the median family income. And so we know that some students, they're okay, they're set, some students are not. And so we really have to reach out to those students. We have to understand what those students need, and we have to make sure that those students get what they need to be successful at our institution. So now if we talk about our innovations and kind of what we've done a lot over the last decade or so. So we did run a food assistance survey in 2018. And so this allowed us to see what students at our institution need in terms of food. And so again, it went back to that food insecurity. Let's understand the picture. Let's understand what's going on. And then that has evolved into our basic needs survey. And so we launched the basic needs survey in 2021, and we've looked at it again in 2024. This survey at our institution really allowed us to see how many students are affected by basic needs and securities as I defined them on the previous slide. That 2024 basic needs survey has kind of been one of the main highlights of our office. We had more than 8,000 students complete that survey, and so it gave us a really good understanding of basic needs and securities here at CU. One of our main findings from that was that our international and graduate students have insecurities that our undergraduate students do not. And so we're understanding that population more and more. We know how we need to help these students for success at the institution. And then as with any good quantitative data, we also collected some qualitative data through our emergency housing assistance interviews. So we have an emergency housing program here at CU Boulder that provides short-term housing for students who need it. So this can be students who have to break a lease and they're in between places due to insecure or unstable housing. It can be due to landlords who are acting without ethics. It can be due to roommates who are acting out of character. We know that students need to feel safe. We know that students need to feel secure. And so we have this emergency housing assistance program for these students. The interviews are led by Masters of Social Work students to further understand and offer counseling and guidance to these students. So we want to understand where these students are coming from, what they have, what they need, and then how we can help students inside the classroom and then help them secure a job. And so that job will help them pay for rent during and after their time here in college. And then we want to help them, again, be safe, be secure, so that that can help them in the classroom, because that's our number one priority, is making students succeed in the classroom and academically here at the institution. And so as we move on to the outcomes, we've done a lot of proactive outreach to faculty and staff at the institution. One of the biggest things we hear year after year is that students don't know about our Basic Needs Center. They don't know that these resources are available. And so what does that mean? It means we have to go out to faculty and inform faculty about our Basic Needs Center, about our Buff Pantry, about the Emergency Housing Assistance Program, because we know that if we inform faculty, faculty see the students. Faculty will inform the students. So we've done a lot of proactive outreach to the faculty. We've also done outreach to staff because we have student-facing staff who are working with these students every single day, whether it's in clubs and organizations, whether it's in the dining hall. Staff are seeing these students, they know what to look for, they know what students need help. And so we're talking with staff about how to refer students to the office and how to set up students for success. The second point here, this is our assessment, insights, and research. This is the office that I work in. We have formed a very close relationship with our Basic Needs Center. And so that center and the director in that center have worked very close with us over the years. We do assessment for them every single year on the students who are coming in and out of their office, of the students who are utilizing our services. We do end-of-year surveys every year that we administer to thousands of students across campus. We have direct language in there and questions to ask students about the Basic Needs Center because we want to understand, what do students know? What do students need? And then lastly, this is one of our most exciting initiatives this year, the Colorado Higher Education Basic Needs Coalition. So this is a coalition with over a dozen, even close to 24 institutions across the state of Colorado, where folks just get together and talk about basic needs insecurities, how we can help each other, what different institutions need. And so we have 2-year, we have 4-year, public, private, we have institutions all across the state coming together and just discussing ideas. We know that we need to support students. We know we need to help students. And so what we have at CU Boulder, can it be replicated at Colorado State? Can it be replicated at Front Range Community College or Colorado Mesa? And what do folks need? Do they need us to do some outreach to the Colorado Department of Higher Education? Do we need to get support from our legislators, politicians? What do we need to do for other institutions in Colorado? Because we're not just looking out for students at CU Boulder, we're looking out for students in the state. We want students to succeed no matter what institution they're at, no matter what program they're in. We want to look out for students here in Colorado. So that is kind of a basic overview of what we've done with our Basic Needs Center, and happy to answer questions. And I'm also happy to move us on to the discussion. So I'll pass it on back to George.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for sharing a little bit about the work across campuses and I think how we meet, I think both the basic student needs, learning needs, and then also kind of understand where they are at, I think, as students come into campus and progress through our various processes. And when we selected panelists today, you'll notice that we picked kind of, I think, very different types of institutions to hopefully give a wide variety of how we have approached these and kind of met unique needs. Because I think at any point in time, the understanding the practices and the basis for how we get there, I think, is one of the bigger things that helps us move forward. And so we're not doing these things in vacuum. So our preliminary kind of thought around kind of a facilitated discussion at the end, and we're about to have 5 more minutes to kind of get through these. So I'll jump into, I think, the $10,000 question or $1 million question is, what new tech has helped supported this work, and then how has AI then impacted the work as we approach these? And I will say, big data wise, we've been doing a lot more playing with random forest analysis to kind of do some of the exploratory big data stuff. And then we'll use that and kind of as a preliminary screening and then push it into our data ecosystem. Then on the qualitative side, we've been much more able to do more open-ended response questions or ask for artifacts, and then using Notebook LLM and other AI to do the preliminary analysis and then vet that analysis as an approach, which has given us the ability to do more with qualitative data at scale than we've had in the past. But curious around the rest of folks, like how has AI or how has some of the new tech impacted this work for you all?
I don't think we could have gotten anything that we've done, just the sheer volume, right? If I've got 3,000 students in just my associate's program, and they have 8 weeks worth of curriculum material, and there's anywhere from 4 to 5 competency-based measurements in every single class throughout their entire program. That volume alone of just assessment data is astronomical. And then also having to come back and actually mark it down to a mastered competency with anywhere from 3 to 7 performance indicators we also have to measure. The complexity behind doing this kind of measurement is just, from a hand perspective, would have been a bloody nightmare, and we probably would have given up our programmatic accreditation because it would not be doable. At DeVry, we have a protected data lake that we're using with Gemini, to where faculty and students, we can all use the same kind of thing. So we can build those AI related assessments themselves, and then also use it for the data gathering as well. And then I use it as the dean of all of these programs to kind of measure consistency across. How are we measuring our thresholds appropriate? If 2.8 is the number, we say that we've met the program outcome. Are we doing that consistently? I can also narrow down, which is really important at this size of a scale, if I've got a faculty issue or an assessment issue. Like, where's the data misalignment coming from? And I can narrow it down because, I mean, candidly, I have 375 adjunct faculty that teach just in the College of Health Sciences. And so just trying to figure out where the blip is in that much of a data lake can just be astronomical. So we have to leverage these AI tools just to stay ahead of the game. And then we have annual reporting we have to do every year as programmatically accredited programs. So being able to distill that data down into something that's manageable, that I can write a narrative on. And our APAR reports are due at the end of May every year. So I'm in the thick of that right now, trying to get all that together, and even leveraging the AI to help us, like, okay, here's the data. What does it see where we're not attached? Like, we're personally attached to the curriculum and we're personally attached to having good outcomes. But if the data says this, how do we actually talk about that and not take it personally and not feel like we're attacked or whatever? So that, for us at our scale, has been hands down a lifesaver, just for sanity's sake, and just being able to really look at our information in a way that takes out those personal pieces to say, okay, here's what it is. Data, garbage in, garbage out. We've said that for eons, right, when it comes to data. But this really gives us an added layer, and helps with the narrative component to explain it, or to say, okay, what should we do next? How do we fix this? What recommendations can you make when you've got a faculty who's like so attached to a course and is just convinced that that assignment is the only way to figure this out? And we're like, maybe for you, but everyone's failing it. So we need to we need to talk about this a little bit deeply. And it's opened the doors for a lot more in-depth conversation and collaboration with our faculty. So I would say for us, that's the biggest thing, just because of our size. It's just been the only way I can survive, I think, in this role with that much data looking at me every single day.
Yeah, from my side, I'm using a little bit for data analysis, but I'd say the biggest change for is that program faculty feel a lot more empowered to do kind of larger scale assessments and really try to look at as many students as possible rather than trying to get like the smallest sample size possible because they feel enabled by these AI tools. So not all programs are using it, but simply to have the option there is giving a lot of our like science, engineering, mathematics kinds of courses the ability to leverage those tools in both data collection and data analysis. And then our interior design and photography programs are still just using portfolios, but they're able to now survey people and collect that qualitative data and pop that into an AI tool for some preliminary analysis too. So even our more artsy programs where the artifacts they're collecting can't really be easily put into an AI, some of the kind of indirect assessments they're being able to use those tools for that. So I think it's just opening up a lot of doors for more robust data collection and analysis that would have had to be done by hand or through the LMS. And a lot of our faculty don't have a good it's all through our e-learning office, which is, as so many of us are, overworked and overburdened. So getting the data directly from them is a lot more difficult. But when they can control it in-house, they are able to do the design, implementation, and analysis steps all themselves rather than relying on an office that may or may not be consistent with communication.
And I'll try to keep this real short for everyone. We typically use it for qualitative coding and theming is one thing that we look at. So when we have transcripts from surveys and focus groups, we will go through that and we will do an initial pass. We will pull out our codes, our themes. What do we see? And then we'll see, we use Copilot. And so what does Copilot see? And so if Copilot is my little buddy helping me out throughout all these little things, what does it see and what can it pull out? And what are some codes and themes from these focus groups and transcripts that it can highlight? So we use it in conjunction with what we're already doing.
I think we probably have time for one, I think, closing set of commentary for folks as they think about starting this work. And for me, having, I changed institutions 2 years ago, and what was happening for us there versus what is happening for us here is holistically different. So my recommendation to you is really understand your students, I think, is a starting point, and what is happening in the student experience that may be unique to your institution. And then from there, go out and find other campuses that have had some innovation to support that area. I think is a huge aspect of understanding student success, and then also creating the right interventions for student success. Becca, if you want to go next, so since you got last time.
Yeah, I just, say listen to your students, do what your students need. We're here for student success. So let this be, community-based practice and view students as your community and listen to them, lean into them, and honor them.
Chris?
I think I'll just say that agency, whether it's faculty agency in processes or student agency in their own education and the work that happens, requires not only the authority to make decisions, but also the know-how to make informed decisions. So whatever you can do to set up your students, your faculty to have both parts of agency, I think will lead you to success no matter what you're doing.
Last but not least, Laura, Catherine.
Wow, all those things are good. Like, how do you follow that group? I think agency is super important because having collaboration and buy-in from the faculty is a huge driver. It also can encourage students to actually do the activities themselves to keep them in the game, so that the assessments really give us a good idea of where they are. And to me, I think that is the biggest indicator we need as educators to make sure that we're developing programming that is meeting not only the workforce needs and expectations of our workforce, but also meeting our students where they're at. And to be able to advocate for them, and assessment's the perfect tool to do that if it's built right, if it's collaborative, and if faculty have buy-in. So I think those, are it's the perfect trifecta, if you will, to make it work.
Thank you all for joining us today, and feel free, as this is posted, there'll be contact ways to get in touch with each of us as presenters, so feel free to follow up with us individually. And again, thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.